Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to completely unpack the project documentation for Beyond. Now, if you're not familiar, Beyond is a fascinating new talent intelligence platform built literally from the ground up to fix our deeply broken hiring system. I mean, if you've ever felt the absolute frustration of sending a resume into a black hole, or on the flip side, if you've ever drowned in a sea of unqualified applications as a hiring manager, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Today, we're going to explore the exact product definition, the pre-designed strategies, and the underlying logic of a platform that wants to completely revolutionize how we match people to roles.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to hit 1. The broken hiring machine. 2. Beyond, a new model. 3. The 8-dimension framework. 4. Gates versus weights. 5. Decoding culture fit. And finally, 6. Building the platform. Let's get right into it.
Section 1, the broken hiring machine. Why the traditional ATS is failing us.
To really understand the solution here, we have to validate a massive shared pain point first. The traditional hiring machine, it's fundamentally broken. Companies are wasting endless hours reviewing totally unqualified CVs and dealing with poor cultural fits down the line. And meanwhile, talent is applying completely blind. They get absolutely no visibility into why they were rejected or what critical skills they might actually be missing. It's just a lose-lose situation fueled by outdated applicant tracking systems. The traditional model is pretty much just CV, apply, screen, reject, repeat. It relies super heavily on AI keyword matching, which, by the way, the documentation explicitly notes is now a completely commoditized feature. It offers zero competitive advantage anymore. Candidates apply in the dark, and they get rejected with zero explanation. But Beyond totally flips the script. They actually analyze candidates across real fit dimensions before they even hit apply. So you get a match score up front and, super importantly, a clear upskilling roadmap instead of just a cold automated rejection email.
Okay, Section 2, Beyond, a new model, redefining the candidate journey.
The core product loop of Beyond is absolutely fascinating, mostly because it's built on this philosophy of development rather than just outright exclusion. It doesn't just reject people, it actively helps them out. If a candidate is a strong match right out of the gate, boom, they apply directly. But if they're only a partial match or even a low match, the platform drops them into this distinct new loop. It helps them assess their missing skills, guides them to actually develop those skills through integrated learning platforms, and then allows them to rematch once they're truly ready. The core principle written right into the project documentation is that the goal isn't just to reject you, it's to show you the precise path to readiness. So if we aren't just matching keywords on a resume to achieve all this, how on earth does the platform evaluate genuine fit in the first place?
That brings us to Section 3, the 8-dimension framework, moving beyond the resume.
To evaluate that genuine fit, Beyond analyzes candidates across 8 real fit dimensions. This framework serves as the absolute source of truth for the platform's matching engine. It evaluates the core requirement, required domain, languages, work authorization, seniority level, education, skills, and finally, culture fit. What is incredibly refreshing about this holistic view is how it prevents those absolutely devastating late-stage hiring surprises. You know the ones, by factoring in practical hurdles like work authorization and seniority level right alongside technical skills and culture, it builds a complete 360-degree picture of a candidate. It goes way, way beyond just stringing together a bunch of industry buzzwords on a piece of paper.
Now, the really crucial point here is understanding the fundamental difference in nature between something like a core requirement and a skill. Think of a core requirement as an exclusionary entry gate. It's a mandatory condition that absolutely positively must be met. For example, if a back-end engineering role requires Python and you don't know Python, there is literally no point in evaluating the other 7 dimensions for that specific job. Skills, on the other hand, well, they evaluate the depth and quality of the overall fit. They measure the supporting technical and soft skills that make you a uniquely great candidate rather than just determining your bare minimum baseline eligibility to even hit the apply button.
Section 4, Gates versus weights, the underlying math of the match.
So that brings us to the real meat of the platform's logic. How do companies actually configure those 8 dimensions to reflect the complex, often really messy realities of hiring? And how does Beyond calculate your final match score?
Because every single industry and every single role is completely different, there are no fixed default assumptions baked into this platform. Instead, it relies on a highly flexible, company-defined calculation system. Companies get to define exactly how each of the 8 dimensions functions for a specific open role. They get to decide if a dimension is a mandatory deal breaker, what they call a gate that hard blocks a match if you fail it, or if it's a weighted criterion that simply feeds into your final match score percentage.
For example, a remote-first company might make a specific language a mandatory gate, while another company might just make it weighted because they have a local office. The strategic trade-off here is that while this offers just incredible flexibility for hiring managers, it also means the onboarding wizard for those companies needs to be exceptionally smart and intuitive so they don't get bogged down during the setup process.
Once a candidate safely passes all those mandatory gates, meaning there are no legal or core requirement hard blocks in the way, the weighted dimensions kick in to calculate that final score. As an initial suggested distribution, skills take the lead at 25%, followed by experience and culture fit at 15% each, seniority at 10%, and the remaining 35% is just distributed across other company-defined dimensions like language and education. Now, the documentation clearly flags this as an open decision. It notes that these weights are really just a starting point. They're going to require careful post-launch validation against real-world hiring data to ensure they actually predict long-term success on the job.
Section 5. Decoding culture fit. Measuring the unmeasurable.
Next, we need to tackle arguably the most nuanced and innovative part of the entire platform, how Beyond attempts to measure something as totally elusive as behavioral and culture fit without relying on a self-reported, subjective piece of paper. Relying on a CV just isn't enough, so Beyond actually approaches this by comparing company culture data against a candidate's public digital footprint, things like their professional LinkedIn or their GitHub activity. But to pull this off effectively and, legally, strict guardrails are hard-coded right into the process. The documentation requires structured input from the company, meaning no vague, unmeasurable free text descriptions of the company vibe, and crucially, it requires explicit legal opt-ins from the candidate. The platform cannot and will not just secretly scrape your data. Full compliance with privacy laws like GDPR is absolutely mandatory. Finally, the platform has to clearly communicate to everyone involved that this is merely a data-driven estimate. It's not some definitive clinical psychological assessment, which prevents people from putting overconfidence in correlations that might not actually be causal.
Section 6. Building the platform, the roadmap and strategic recommendations.
So, to fulfill that develop phase we talked about earlier in the candidate loop, the documentation notes that Beyond plans to partner with established, heavy-hitter learning platforms like Coursera and DataCamp. This is what allows them to offer a highly personalized upskilling roadmap based on a candidate's specifically identified gaps. However, a really key strategic recommendation here is focused entirely on positioning. This learning integration, it's supporting infrastructure. It is not the core product itself, and the planning documents heavily emphasize that it should not lead the primary marketing message to either consumers or businesses. It's the plumbing, not the shiny new faucet.
Following that exact logic, the overarching strategic recommendation for the build is to prioritize launching the matching engine first as a minimum viable product. The current, grand scope of this project effectively bundles three massive products: a matching engine, a learning marketplace, and a professional community, all into one ecosystem. The strategy here is basically, don't boil the ocean. Avoid that massive execution risk by proving the core analysis engine is actually accurate and useful first before you ever attempt to expand into the wider, vastly more complex ecosystem.
And we're going to leave you with this provocative question drawn straight from the project's Open Decisions log. Because as Beyond seeks to completely disrupt traditional recruitment, shift the focus from lazy keyword matching to genuine skill and culture fit, and actually turn rejection into a roadmap for development, the way they ultimately choose to monetize this massive value, whether that's going to be subscriptions, placement fees, or some kind of freemium model, remains the final, absolutely fascinating puzzle piece to solve. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and we'll see you next time.